The look on my father's face when 15 relatives walked into a completely barren kitchen on his 60th birthday is something I will never forget. There was no catering, no family feast, not even a single slice of bread in the pantry. He stood there, red-faced, screaming, "What have you done to my party?" I just stood in the center of the room, folded my arms, and handed him a framed copy of a text message he'd sent me 3 months earlier. The room went dead silent as my aunt read it out loud. Before we get into how a man who built his entire reputation on being a generous patriarch ended up humiliated in front of his entire extended family, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below the city or country you're watching from so I can see how far our story travels. My name is Clara, I'm 28 years old, and up until 3 months ago, I actually believed that blood was thicker than water. I'm a remote software developer, which means I pull long, exhausting hours from behind a laptop screen. Last year, after my apartment lease ended, I made a strategic decision to move back into my parents' home temporarily. The goal was simple: save every spare penny for a down payment on my own place. But I didn't come back as a freeloading teenager. I paid $800 a month in rent, covered the high-speed internet bill, and quietly paid for 80% of the household groceries, buying the high-end cuts of meat, fresh produce, and gourmet coffee my parents loved. Then came a Sunday dinner that changed everything. We were sitting around the dining table when my father, Richard, decided to launch into one of his signature speeches. Richard is a man who built his entire ego on being the generous, provider patriarch of the family. But that evening, after asking me to pass the roast beef, he looked at me with pure disdain. "Must be nice," he scoffed, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Living here, eating our food, using our utilities, and saving all your little money while your mother and I slave away." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. "Dad, I pay rent, and I bought this entire dinner." He slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses clatter. "Don't you talk back to me in my own house. You throw a few crumbs at us and think you own the place. You're a parasite living off my dime." He leaned across the table, his eyes dark with unprovoked rage. "Starting today, buy your own food. Stop living off us." I looked at my mother, waiting for her to step in, to remind him who actually stocked the fridge every Tuesday. But she just stared at her plate and nodded quietly. "He's right, Clara. Quit freeloading." A cold stillness settled over me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply set my fork down, looked my father dead in the eye, and said, "Okay, Dad. If that's what you want, that's exactly what you'll get." The very next morning, I began executing my plan with clinical precision. If my father wanted strict boundaries regarding food and expenses, I was going to give him an absolute masterclass in compliance. My first stop was an electronics store, where I bought a heavy-duty mini fridge and a microwave for my bedroom. Next, I went to the hardware store and purchased a sturdy deadbolt, installing it on my bedroom door while my parents were out running errands. From that moment on, my room became a self-contained sanctuary. I stopped going to the family grocery store on Tuesdays. Instead, I shopped strictly for myself. I bought single-portion meals, individual cartons of almond milk, and just enough produce to last me 3 days at a time. Everything went straight into my locked bedroom fridge. Downstairs, in the main kitchen, the transformation was immediate and devastating. For the past 2 years, I had quietly kept the pantry stocked with organic coffee, premium olive oil, imported spices, high-grade meats, and artisanal cheeses. Within 4 days of my strike, the main refrigerator looked like an abandoned warehouse. There was a half-empty jar of mayonnaise, a shriveled lemon, and a carton of expired milk. My father initially thought I was throwing a childish tantrum that would blow over in 48 hours. On Wednesday morning, I watched from the hallway as he walked into the kitchen, opened the coffee canister, and found it completely empty. He rattled the plastic jar, searched the cabinets, and then stomped into the living room, grumbling about how nobody respects the house supply. But he didn't dare ask me for anything because doing so would mean admitting he relied on me. By week 2, reality began to set in for my parents. They were forced to shop for themselves on my father's stingy budget, and the stark drop in their lifestyle quality was hilarious. No more ribeye steaks. They were eating rubbery hot dogs and store-brand canned soup. Meanwhile, the rich aroma of my personal takeout, sushi, Thai curry, and wood-fired pizza frequently drifted out of my bedroom. Then came the real test, my father's upcoming 60th birthday party. Richard had been boasting about this milestone event for 6 months to anyone who would listen. Every year, he hosted a massive family gathering, expecting a lavish spread to maintain his image as the prosperous patriarch. In previous years, I had quietly spent hundreds of dollars ordering high-end catering platters, buying fine wines, and setting up the entire banquet. A week before the party, my father stood in the kitchen doorway, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Clara," he muttered, looking anywhere but at my eyes. "Your birthday party duties, you're taking care of the food arrangements like usual, right?" I smiled warmly, my voice dripping with perfect, polite composure. "Don't worry, Dad. I'm taking care of my exact responsibility." He gave a satisfied grunt, completely convinced that I'd caved. He had no idea that his self-crafted trap was about to spring shut. The morning of my father's 60th birthday arrived, and the air in the house was thick with anticipation. My father spent hours in front of the hallway mirror, carefully ironing his best-dressed shirt and adjusting his watch, eager to play the grand, generous host he always claimed to be. Around 2 in the afternoon, the cars began pulling into the driveway. 15 extended family members filed through the front door. My aunts, uncles, cousins, and even my father's older brother, Uncle Frank, who rarely made the 2-hour drive. The house filled with boisterous laughter, warm hugs, and loud congratulations. Everyone was expecting the usual extravagant celebration, complete with rich food, flowing wine, and the lavish hospitality Richard was known to brag about on social media. My father stood in the living room, puffing out his chest and soaking up the attention like a king receiving his subjects. "Welcome, welcome," he boomed, waving his hands expansively. "Nobody leaves this house hungry today. Make yourselves at home while we set up the feast." After an hour of socializing, Uncle Frank rubbed his hands together and grinned. "All right, Richard, I smelled the roast from the driveway. Let's see what kind of spread you put together for your big 6-0. Right this way," my father announced proudly, leading the entire crowd toward the kitchen. "Clara handled the setup, so you know it's top tier." He threw the kitchen doors open with a theatrical flourish, stepping aside so everyone could marvel at the banquet. Instead, a suffocating silence fell over the room. The long dining table was completely bare, no tablecloth, no platters, no cutlery. My father blinked, his smile faltering, and rushed over to the refrigerator, yanking the door open. It was completely empty, save for a single jar of mustard and his shriveled lemon. He frantically pulled open the pantry doors, then the cabinets. Nothing. Not a single chip, cracker, or slice of bread. I had spent the last month quietly canceling every recurring catering order, unsubscribing from the bulk grocery deliveries I normally paid for, and keeping my own food locked tightly inside my room. My father turned around, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of crimson as 15 pairs of eyes stared at him in utter shock. His eyes locked onto me as I stood leaning against the archway, holding a single framed piece of paper in my hands. "What have you done to my party?" he screamed, his voice cracking with pure rage as the illusion of his generosity shattered right in front of his entire family. I didn't flinch. As my father stood there trembling in anger, I walked calmly to the center of the kitchen and handed him the picture frame. "Happy 60th birthday, Dad," I said, my voice echoing clearly off the bare walls. He snatched it out of my hands, expecting a bill or a legal notice, but his eyes widened as he read the glass-encased paper. It was an enlarged screenshot of the text message he had sent me 3 months ago, right after our Sunday dinner argument. Below it, I had attached a printed, itemized breakdown of every single cent I had spent on household groceries, catering, and bills over the past 2 years, totaling over $24,000. "What is this nonsense?" he spat, trying to hide the paper, but Uncle Frank stepped forward and took the frame right out of his shaking hands. Uncle Frank adjusted his glasses and read the text message aloud for the entire room to hear. "Starting today, buy your own food. Stop living off us. You're a parasite." A collective gasp rippled through my aunts and cousins. My mother sank into a chair, hiding her face in her hands. "Richard," Uncle Frank said, his voice dripping with disgust as he looked up from the receipts. "Are you telling me that Clara has been buying all the food for your legendary parties for the last 2 years, while you sat back and took credit for it?" "She was living under my roof," my father stammered, his face pale as the room turned against him. "She owed me. She paid you $800 a month in rent, Richard." Aunt Clara interjected, her eyes blazing. "And you publicly called your own daughter a parasite for eating the food she bought with her own money?" The room fell into an awkward, suffocating silence. My father's carefully constructed image as the wealthy, generous patriarch disintegrated in less than 60 seconds. My cousins began murmuring to one another, while 2 of my uncles quietly grabbed their coats. Nobody offered my father congratulations. Nobody sang happy birthday. Instead, Uncle Frank turned to me, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and said, "Clara, I am so sorry you had to put up with this nonsense." He then turned back to my father with a look of utter pity. "We're leaving, Richard. I suggest you use some of that rent money to order yourself a pizza." The next morning, before the sun had even fully risen over the horizon, a moving truck pulled into the driveway. I had signed the lease on a beautiful, sunlit 2-bedroom apartment 3 weeks prior, keeping the news entirely to myself. While my parents were still asleep, I carried down my luggage, my mini fridge, and the few personal belongings I kept in my room. As I loaded the final box into the back of the truck, my father walked out onto the porch, looking older and smaller than I had ever seen him. The bravado from the night before was completely gone, replaced by a sullen, desperate reality. "Clara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you don't have to do this. We can work this out." I stopped and looked at him, feeling no anger, no resentment, only a profound sense of clarity. "There's nothing to work out, Dad," I replied calmly. "You told me to stop living off you, so I'm making sure I never do again." Without waiting for his response, I got into my car and drove away, closing that chapter of my life forever. Over the next few weeks, the fallout from that birthday party was absolute. Without my $800 monthly rent check and the thousands of dollars I quietly spent on household expenses, my parents were forced to drastically cut back on their lifestyle. My father tried calling and texting multiple times, claiming he wanted to reconcile, but I knew the truth. He didn't miss his daughter. He missed the financial cushion I provided. I set firm, non-negotiable boundaries, restricting our contact to brief, formal exchanges. Today, sitting in my own living room surrounded by peace and independence, I realized that standing up to my father wasn't just about food or money. It was about reclaiming my self-worth from someone who only valued me when I was convenient to him. If you've ever had a family member take your generosity for granted or try to tear you down when you were holding them up, know that setting boundaries is never something you should feel guilty for. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have stayed quiet, or would you have executed the exact same plan? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.